everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Light Rail by LRSSB. In this episode, I speak with Craig O'Brien and Susan Gray about the importance of reporting safety, health and wellbeing concerns, and also the importance of listening to promote a healthier safety culture and peace of mind. Hi both, you alright?
Yeah, well. Absolutely fine.
Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Susan Gray. I work for CIRUS. That's the transport industry's confidential safety hotline. And I have been there for nearly 10 years now.
Wow, okay.
My background is in all different types of external communications, external relations. So I've worked in marketing, PR, public affairs, customer relations, and across a bunch of different sectors, including charity, health charity. I worked for Macmillan, and also freedom of information, economic development, mostly in Scotland.
Okay.
But I came to transport and health and safety just under 10 years ago.
Okay. Fab. Well, we'll get back to that one. Craig, do you want to briefly just reintroduce yourself?
I will, yeah. For those of you that don't know, I'm Craig O'Brien. I'm the Head of Engineering, Safety and Innovation for the Light Rail Safety Standards Board. Been with that organisation for around 3 years now. Came across from UK Tram, the trade body and at the minute the parent company for LRSSB. Been in the light rail sector for 18 years this year. 12 of those previously spent with Stagecoach Supertram, who is now Siftel or Simca, whichever way you look at it. So been immersed in the sector for quite some time. My first time in what is classed as a safety body. Got an infrastructure background, so really enjoying it. There's a lot of variety and diversity in the sector, so hello again.
Sue, would you like to just expand on your background, on your career, how you got into the light rail side of things with Cyrus?
Okay, yeah. Well, I joined Cyrus in 2016. I was approached by RSSB. Cyrus is a wholly owned subsidiary of RSSB, and they were looking for somebody to work in their engagement team. I hadn't got a background in transport as such. I had worked for a little while for Intercity when I was a student, but I was really interested in it because I've always worked in roles where the purpose of the company has been sort of societal change, or some sort of social output rather than making money. That's not really. I've never really worked in a commercial environment, and I had been working with freedom of information, which was about encouraging people to adopt services and observe laws, and that was quite similar to the idea of coming in to work in transport. So it was really something that came to me, and I thought that sounds really interesting, and it was something I could use my transferable skills for, quite a similar approach. So I joined, and I really didn't know anything about transport or light rail or health and safety, but I've learned a lot over the last 10 years. And when we had the opportunity, when Cyrus started to expand into its service being offered to light rail organisations, I was really interested in that, partly because I really like the social engagement side of it, the fact that light rail organisations and light rail operations work within their communities. They're integrated in a way that some heavy rail operations aren't, and that really appealed to me. And I live near Edinburgh, and so we had our own light rail system there that I was used to using, and I just said when the opportunity came up that I would really like to get to know the sector better and work more closely with light rail networks, and that's when I found out about LRSSB and got to know the team here a little bit better. So we've been working together for 3-4 years now?
I think, did we
like
first
that?
meet at an LROC meeting?
We met at an LROC meeting
the
and
Light Rail
realised,
Operators Committee,
and we realised that we had a lot of shared interests in similar things, so it made sense for that to develop into the partnership we've got today.
You'd already got a relationship with Mark Ashmore on a committee, of course.
That's right. Mark Ashmore sits on the Cyrus committee as well, and he represents light rail.
Oh, fab. So can you just expand on how Cyrus was born, really, and became an organisation?
Yeah, Cyrus was first created by ScotRail about 28 years ago now. they realised that there were some information about concerns that wasn't reaching them because people weren't raising their concerns. And when they looked into that, one of the barriers, it's a complex thing why people do or don't report, but one of the barriers was people were worried that it would cause them some sort of problem, or they would get into trouble, if you like, for want of a better word. Or maybe they didn't want to raise something where the issue was about the behaviour of a peer, someone that they were, you know, well acquainted with. They didn't want to be viewed as being a telling on colleagues, if you like. So ScotRail created Cyrus, which was very similar, as it is to this day, to other reporting channels. The difference is we protect the identity of the person who raises the concern. That's the only material difference, really.
Right.
And that was enough to encourage a certain proportion of people who weren't speaking up to come forward. And the idea was to then take those insights, that information, share it with the company, so they could then do what they needed to with that to address the risk. But the person's identity was protected. Now, after the Ladbroke Grove crash, there was an inquiry, and the service was then made national, so it went beyond ScotRail and Scotland and became a UK-wide service at that point.
I think what's interesting with that, drawing parallels to as well as a Ladbroke Grove born out of that, similar to the Sandilands tragedy that we often mention in some of these podcasts, which is why LRSSB is so often it does take a tragedy, sadly, for these organisations to come to fruition, but I often think that's the positive that comes out of a very negative situation. So there's definitely parallels with that, isn't there? And I just regarding Sandilands, I mean, 2016-17 now, but fast forward several years, one of the things that came out of that inquiry, speaking of that, was the potential underreporting in the sector, wasn't it, Sue? Which was a conversation we had very early on, and how can we get people to speak up more in light rail. It's a small sector, but it was clear that if you look at the statistics nationwide, which I think you can speak more about, it was seen that maybe we're not quite being vocal enough and reporting enough of maybe the incidents. We've certainly moved on with that with the inception of LRSSB, but obviously working with Cyrus was one of the reasons why we got involved with one another, amongst others.
So obviously us three know how important safety is for obviously anything with organisations and so on, but can you expand on how important it is to actually report safety concerns?
Okay, well, I suppose what I would say is if you were working in an industry and you were day in, day out, you're at the front line, you're seeing things as they're happening, maybe in a way that people who are working on the office side of things don't.
Yeah.
And you know how it should look, and also you might spot when something isn't quite right, whether it's the conditions that you're working in or the behaviour of other people. And at that point you've got a choice. You can either say something or not say something, and everybody has that point of choice.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's very important to choose to actually raise it is if you think it's almost like guilty knowledge. If something happens and an incident occurs and you could have prevented it because you had knowledge you didn't share, then an individual then has to make peace with himself and live with that. Now, the thing is that you might think, oh, that's a really small issue. It's not big enough to bother about. But if you look at investigations, quite often when incidents do happen, it's a combination of things coming together in a perfect storm. So if you don't speak up, you have to then accept that you could potentially have prevented something from happening, and that, so there is a kind of a moral aspect to it, and it's why we talk about making the right call and raising your concerns. Now, the reason why it's important as well is because people don't necessarily think that because they've seen something that's important, they might think, oh, someone else will speak up about that, but actually that other person might be thinking the same thing, and as a result the thing doesn't get raised. If the organisation doesn't have the information, they can't act upon it. And that's why speaking up is a really important way of getting real high quality evidence about health and safety concerns to the people who can act upon it. And if you don't do that, then that opportunity is lost. And if the opportunity is lost, then that could lead to preventable incidents. Now, they have human costs, and those are by far and away the worst ones, and they can be terrible. But they also have financial and reputational costs as well to an organisation. You could actually really undermine the organisation by not speaking up. So it doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do. It isn't. Sometimes it can be really challenging. But I would always say to somebody, it's really important you speak up using whatever channel works best for you, but don't stay silent, because essentially it's almost like permitting something to remain unchecked that could lead to a harmful event.
Yeah, so I guess it's like if you're bothered about that and then don't report it, then why would you bother about it in the first place? That kind
exactly.
of yeah.
And I think in an ideal world, we'd all work in organisations that were of 100% trust, and we would feel confident enough and secure enough to be able to broach everything with our line managers or superiors or peers. But that's not the world we live in, and I think you obviously need kind of a forum or a tool like Cyrus to be able to get those concerns over that don't necessarily, as Sue said earlier, come back on you, and that fear of being the one. And I think that's where your organisation comes in as an alternative to maybe going through the channels that we're slightly uncomfortable with, and I think we've all been there. Even as a kind of middle manager, a high level manager now, you still have some concerns about escalating things because of potential repercussions, whereas you can rely on an organisation like Cyrus to be objective about this and utilise that information for the greater good. So I'd certainly see the benefits of it.
There's an academic called Dr. Mark Noort who did some research, and it was about a phenomenon called safety silence. And what his research concluded, and it wasn't specific to this country or to transport, was that about 50% of the time people don't speak up. So for every person who raises a concern, there's one out there who hasn't. That's quite a high figure.
50%, yeah. That's high.
And what we're trying to do, and some of the work we're doing with LRSSB, with Laura and Craig, is to close that gap.
Yeah.
So it's not the people. I think this is important to stress as well. It's not the people who would speak up anyway and are perfectly happy to do so. It's always better if somebody can use an internal channel if they can.
Yeah.
Who we are trying to target are the ones who aren't saying anything.
Yeah.
And we're trying to encourage them to come forward and speak up. Now, if they come forward and speak up using the internal channels that the networks have got, that's great. But we're always there as a backup, as an alternative, if you like, a safety net.
Yes.
So I would never expect us to get hundreds of reports. That would feel wrong. We're just the safety net for when, the other channels that exist don't work in a particular set of circumstances for someone.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything in particular that LRSB and Cyrus are doing together to help with the reporting?
I'll let you speak.
We've been working with Laura Reardon on looking at data analysis. So we've been looking at data from the risk profile and from TARE to see if there's anything in there that indicates that the likelihood of something happening is really high, but the reporting of it is really low, because that might indicate that there's a gap there. We're not getting as many reports as we expect, and that's a piece of work that Laura's leading on, in which we're still working through that. But some of the initial findings are quite interesting. We also have some data that we've been able to share from Cyrus about the sorts of things that get raised by light rail workers to Cyrus, and they tend to be things like rules and procedures that aren't being followed.
Right.
Not that they don't exist, but that they're not being followed on the ground.
Okay.
Infrastructure issues, issues around things like seat comfort and temperature issues come up. So sort of those kinds of environmental things. But one of the most common things is when you have a colleague who's not following the procedure or not acting safely, and an individual might choose to come to Cyrus with that because they don't want to go to the boss because it might damage their relationship with that individual.
Right, okay.
And the reason why Cyrus is good for that sort of thing is because we focus on the issue, not the individual. So the organisation won't know. They won't know who's raised it, but they also won't know the individuals that are behaving unsafely, because we protect them as well. What we do is we share the information about the whole concern so the organisation can investigate.
Right, okay, so it's not to actually target the person that's doing it wrong, it's just to help.
That's right.
Just to make sure the procedures are being followed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's such an important point, and I'll make that real with a story that I was party to, and we'd spent some time, we got a new starter, and we'd run through all the training and all the health and safety stuff and all the things procedurally that we would expect that individual to do, and he went out with two long-serving individuals onto track to do said task, and he realised that they weren't following these procedures that we just drilled in. And he challenged them, and it was very uncomfortable for him that he's got 2 new colleagues and he's now seen to be this disruptor and someone who's not one of the lads. And of course, it's the very thing that the organisation was drilling in now. With the benefit of hindsight, that individual might have been able to go away and do that through Cyrus. And while I respect the fact that he was willing to do that, it then, for a short period, made his life very difficult with people that he'd just come to work with. So, you have to make it real. I think it's easy to sort of have a narrative about what ifs and maybes, but that I'm sure that happens time and again in organisations. And it's that ability to be able to stop that and give people the confidence that there is someone willing to listen. So.
Yeah, I think back to when I used to drive buses. I remember there was, not me personally, but I remember there was a situation where a driver did report something and basically just got shunned out the canteen. So it does there was only a few drivers, including me, that would actually still talk to him, but everybody else just literally turned their back on him. So it's, but then it was a valid reason what he did report. But it's really sad to see they're just trying to do the right thing. So.
And I think it also recognises that that is human nature. And you can't fight against human nature. So the idea of Cyrus as part of a wider range of different ways people can come forward is that it gives people the choice where that's the right choice for them. It doesn't mean they'll always use Cyrus. Maybe 9 times out of 10 they won't need to, but this one occasion when they might think, well, I'm just not going to say anything, Cyrus gives them that alternative. But you were asking about what else we're doing with LRSSB. So we've got that piece of work we're doing with Laura, and the next phase of that is to do some focus groups. Okay. So we're going out in partnership to a number of networks, and we're going to be doing a bit of a roadshow to explain how LRSSB supports frontline workers, and then we're going to do the focus groups. So Carl and Laura will lead the roadshow bit and I'll lead the focus groups, and then that will provide us with some rich qualitative data which will help us understand why people don't report certain things more than others, which we think will be really useful to help guide our own communications and interventions as well, and try and actually encourage those people who are maybe just not putting their head above the parapet to come forward and speak up.
It's a critical piece of work on a number of levels. One you've just mentioned, Sue, one of the observations that was made for LRSSB was, we have a lot of comms, as you well know, Carly, that's your role, with people at kind of at our level, but grassroots people, boots on the ground. It's hard to incept them. They've got jobs that often don't allow us to kind of get front and centre with them. So this demonstrates that, because I know you're going along with the CEO, and obviously that's a commitment from LRSSB, and then it gets the word out about Cyrus and LRSSB, maybe with individuals that still aren't even aware we exist or what we offer. So I think that's a great piece of work. And just touching very briefly on the data-driven analysis that Sue talked about, that, I mean, people can't underestimate that step forward, that we've now got this incredible data from Turner risk model that we're utilising in many ways. And Sue came up with the idea with Laura about spinning it on Cyrus, which I think is, I know you've done that type of work with RSSB, but it's a bit of a first for us, and I don't think it can be underestimated. Maybe we'll find nothing from it, but at least we've used that empirical data as evidence to where we might direct our resources, so to speak. So
And another thing that Craig and I have been talking about for a while, and I'm really excited about because I think it's actually coming to fruition now, is working with Marlene on the learning management system. We've got some great resources that will help. It's not just about raising awareness of Cyrus, but talking about the reporting behaviour. Why is it important to speak up, and how do you do it, and what are the practicalities around that? But also, why is it important to listen? And that's the kind of other side of the story, if you like, is encouraging people in management positions and supervisory positions to actively listen when somebody raises a concern with them, and to understand why actually listening is not an easy thing to do. It's something we've all done since we were babies, and so we think, oh well, everybody can listen, but active listening is a skill, and actually understanding how to listen to people to get that insight from them is part of what we're doing as well.
I think one of the reasons our sort of relationship came and flowered a bit was we both had this mission where we wanted to embed Cyrus and LRSSB within the sector. So what I mean by that is, let's imagine we've got a new starter today, and an organisation will do a business induction, and they'll say, this is what we do as Keolis Amy, for an example, and they'll give them all the background. And what we want to do really with that is to be able to interject what Cyrus is and what LRSSB is. So that individual has a view of the sector as opposed to just where they're working. So I think once we got that goal, that it's almost business as usual. Cyrus is in the psyche of people, that it's there. LRSSB is there as a service and organisation that can support on many levels. Then hopefully that individual's thinking about themselves as part of a community rather than just an individual. And I think we definitely shared that kind of vision. I mean, it wasn't going to be easy, but you've just mentioned the learning platform. That's definitely somewhere where we can hopefully get organisations to sign up to giving us 10 minutes of their induction, so that people are aware and how they can contact us, and various marketing and comms that we run. So we're still working on that, but I think we're getting closer as we start to develop these work streams.
That's an exciting extension of the platform, the learning platform. That'd be great to have it as an addition. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's no reason whatsoever, is there, that we wouldn't promote Cyrus's services on our platform, commercial sensitivities aside, and that's another discussion. But we have that community, that ecosystem where that's very much a part of that, and that is part of the vision as well. Marlene always gets a mention, doesn't she? So
she's gonna love that.
So all bar one, possibly two, but the vast majority of the UK light rail networks are members of Cyrus already. So we've got that commonality of audience, if you like. So we're not trying to plug Cyrus per se. We're trying to encourage better reporting behaviour, and that may or may not lead to more reports coming through Cyrus. But if we saw that reporting gap I spoke about closing, or an increase in reporting generally, we would see that as a positive result.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you are reporting an incident or anything, then it needs to happen. But
that's right.
You mentioned about listening. How is there a way where you can actually train certain people to actually, obviously it's a skill set in itself, to really listen? Do you actively help people to learn how to listen properly? If that sounds really silly question, but I know.
No, I think that's an excellent question. In many ways, that is the question. Yeah. The answer is not at the moment. We don't offer our own training, but we do encourage people to look into training opportunities and personal development opportunities, and encourage our members to consider how they can support their colleagues to become better listeners. Yeah, we've done quite a lot of there's quite a lot of content in blogs on our website and articles we've done where we talk about what good listening looks like and how to listen. And we've done I did a presentation at the last UK Light Rail conference last year, which was about what listening is and why listening is an important skill.
I remember that,
but we don't do our own training. But I do know it's something that we've talked about as potentially something we could do in the future, where we could, pull together the right expertise to
like a workshop kind of
thing. Well, that's right, because I think, it is the case that with listening, people don't necessarily know whether they're good listeners or not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, thought about it.
It's very true. I think it goes back to something you said earlier, Sue, your target audience, not necessarily the people that would speak up. It's the ones that wouldn't for Cyrus. But in terms of active listening, the people that are willing to knock on your door, walk in your office and say, I need to speak to you about a concern, then those opportunities can't be missed if we're not listening properly. And I can hold my hands up and say I've been guilty of that in the past. Now, how important is this to that individual? It's not too important to the long list of things that maybe I've got to do by the end of that day. And I think those opportunities missed, sometimes not recoverable, and then that trust breaks as well, doesn't it? So active listening, it resonated with me. I remember the speech last week, and I thought last year, not last week, and I thought that's an interesting concept. But it's a great question, because it's not something that anybody really teaches or says, have you got a skill in this? Picking up on language and things that you use. And I think certainly something we've discussed in terms of training going forward. I think they call them soft skills these days. I don't know whether they necessarily fall into that bracket, but how can we help managers be better people rather than just managing things?
Because always, I guess, the old phrase is you're a people person, and it's like, well, everyone is a person, so you should be able to be a good listener at the same time. But some people really do want to take their time out and listen, and then others haven't got the time or just don't know how to, like you said, don't know how to listen.
The thing as well is that people I don't believe that most people choose not to listen. I don't think it's like that. I think that people have a lot of pressure. They have their time poor. They're distracted. There's all sorts of evidence that the message that somebody conveys isn't necessarily how it lands. So being a good active listener and developing those skills doesn't mean that you started off not wanting to listen.
Yeah.
Most of us want to listen, but actually what's really interesting is that to do it properly and actively is quite a skill. But that, even just that, take a breath and say, right, I need to just pause and give my full attention to this person. That's a start. But certainly it's a combination of helping people come forward with their message and helping the people on the other side of that equation hear what they've got to say. Because when people feel heard, they're more likely to raise things internally next time, for example.
Yeah, because they realise there wasn't proper big repercussions or anything like that. Right. So okay. So as well as the safety side of things, is there a reporting outlet for like health and well-being aspects?
Well, certainly Cyrus will take any genuine health and safety concern, and we're equally open to safety, health, well-being and environmental concerns. We'll take any and all of those. There are a few exceptions. We can't take real-time issues where the harm is imminent, and we can't take personal grievances. But other than that, but what I would say is, when in doubt, come forward with your concern and we will help if we can. I think health and well-being is, historically, it's been the poor relation.
Yes.
So everything's been focused on safety, but that's changing.
Yeah.
And I think now there is a very well understood appreciation of the link between the two.
I also think there's an expectation. It's a great question, and it's a timely question in terms of that. I think people are understanding that health and well-being and mental health is an issue, and they're well within their rights to ask for support from organisations. And unfortunately, because it's a relatively new thing and it's not been spoken about, and some organisations are ill-equipped to deal with it in terms of back to the ability of certain senior managers, and that's not a criticism. So I think what was interesting to me when we got to see some of the behind-the-scenes data, I'll emphasise it was anonymised, there's nothing, Data Protection Act in there, but it was interesting to see some of the issues raised, if we can call them issues, weren't necessarily quote-unquote safety. They were, things like change management and structural changes in organisations and roles and competency and training. Yeah. We talk a lot about that, and suddenly it was a bit of an eye-opener thinking, it's not, because we know the stigma with safety. It's, it's boring, it's bureaucratic and all that, but it goes, as Sue's rightly said, it goes well beyond that in terms of what our duty is really to the employees. And I was really buoyed by some of those things that I saw. We really should encourage this, because sometimes organisations are unwittingly making decisions that do have untold impacts on individuals and departments that aren't maybe seen for 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. And I speak from experience with that again, the best intentions sometimes. And I think by having that ability to say, well, I really do have an issue with this and I need to tell somebody, to me that gives me some comfort that we might move forward in terms of acknowledging those missteps, if that's what you want to call them.
Because I guess if there was a health or well-being or mental health issue, then that could lead to a safety issue, essentially.
That's exactly it. What you find is that you have issues. If you take, for example, fatigue, anxiety, stress, they can lead to distraction, and distraction can lead to operational incidents. So that's a classic example. But also changes within a business can lead to stress and anxiety. And some of the issues around change management can lead to people being less sure of what to do because maybe the rules have changed. And all of those kind of nuances, those things can lead to safety risks being present that possibly weren't there before or could be reduced. We get a lot of concerns raised about welfare facilities, issues around people having the right welfare facilities. Do they have access to public conveniences? Do they have access to toilets? That kind of thing. So those are big welfare issues, but they have a safety implication, because if you have an individual who doesn't have access to the right welfare facilities, then they may be unnecessarily fatigued while they're driving a tram, for example, and that's clearly got a safety implication. So the two are both sides of the same coin. They are definitely very closely interlinked, I would say.
Yeah, the data absolutely tells us that, Sue, doesn't it? That fatigue, number one, will reduce awareness and thus competency and things like that. We know that for a fact. So really good point.
Fab. Any final words or comments from either of you?
I just think it's challenging this with regards to getting Cyrus out there front and centre in the LRSSB, because we live in a world of, you'll relate to this, Carl, there's so much information coming our way, especially on social media and various media outlets now, and to want to kind of encourage people to, put something else in front of them and say, this is another body that's offering X and Y and Z with no agenda, is amongst the plethora of things that people have got to deal with on a daily basis in terms of procedures and policies and sign this and sign that. So that's exactly the word, Carl. You couldn't have picked a better word. And it can be, and I think if you bring it back to very basic things, and you'll relate to this with your marketing background, Sue, is what's the benefit? So if I'm going to come and engage and I'm going to listen and I'm going to, embrace Cyrus and LRSSB, what's the outcome for me? What is the benefit? And it's about demonstrating that. And I think that's so. You said this about your active listening, but it's about action. So you've come and spoke to me half a dozen times. What have you seen that I've actually done as a result of you being brave enough to come and speak to me? And if people don't see anything, then I think they'll lose a little bit of faith and a little bit of trust. It's a personal opinion, but I think there's enough evidence to support that. I don't know what your view is, Sue.
Well, I think for me, action has to follow. And the other thing is, if there isn't any specific action, at least we enable that loop to be closed, so that the individual who raised the concern finds out what happens. So they might not see the change they expected to see, because maybe the organisation has chosen a different way to address the risk. But they have to come back and say what they did. So that means that the person who raised the concerns will know what's happened as a result of them.
So they'll know action has been taken, it just necessarily won't be visible.
Or it may be no action they expected, or what it may be is that the organisation can reassure them that the concern that they have isn't something they need to be worried about, but we would expect the organisation to explain why that was the case and give them information to reassure them, so that they feel their concern has been addressed. About 75% of the reports we get result in at least one positive action as a result of the issue being raised, which is quite high.
See, that in itself is a very impactful statement to say, look, if you do take the time and effort to do this, there will be some result and some benefit to you, because then it's worth it. If it's deaf ears all the while, people are just going to lose that faith. So that's a really important statistic, I think.
What I would say also is, we have got a range of different resources that we make available to our members to enable them to promote the awareness of Cyrus amongst their staff, which we do ask them to do, because people can't use a service if they don't know it exists. And it's I always equate it a little bit like having car insurance. Just because you've got car insurance doesn't mean you think your car's going to break down next week. But you've got the comfort of knowing it's there if you ever need it. And you may never need it, but it's important that it's there when you need it. And so I'm always happy, and I do work with individual networks to help them raise awareness of Cyrus locally, working with either their safety teams or their communications teams. I even go out and speak to frontline staff to try and do it in as effective and simplistic's not the right word, uncomplicated way, so that it doesn't become yet another thing they have to remember along with everything else. So, for instance, we can integrate it into local communication strategies. If they're running a local campaign, we can hop on the back of that. Joint posters, joint materials, just to try and get that message across in as easy and simple a way as possible. And we have an online app as well, which people can download and use to raise their concerns, because that's, again, making it as simple and easy as possible for people to use the service if they need it.
So I guess at the end of the day, it's just creating a peace of mind. I can report this, I'm not going to get in trouble, and 75% of the time it's going to be sorted.
It's a great summation.
I've got that figure right.
Well, 75% of the time a positive action's taken, there may be reasons for the other 25% why it hasn't happened. It may well be that as a result of the communication that we've managed to broker between the two sides, they realise that it's not something they need to worry about.
But at least they know more than likely there's going to be a result from it in one way or another.
Well, what we can say to anybody who reports to us is that we'll make sure they're heard.
So that creates the peace of mind then that they're heard in.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think just one final point, and it's, to me, this is another example of, kind of the power of collaboration, two organisations coming together without a driven agenda other than to work in a safer, better sector for the people in it. And of course, we're part of that. So, I thank Sue for, your perseverance with us and continuing to kind of pursue that next level in terms of us becoming embedded in business as usual, because I think we are getting closer. So it's been a good journey so far. It's not ended yet.
I think from my point of view, it's been a whole culture change, I think, really across the whole light rail sector. So I'm not saying that no one ever listened to safety, but it's more of a positive front of mind now. So I guess that's just been the culture change to push forward.
It's normalised. I remember Cyrus coming in, it wasn't Sue, probably before your time, coming in and time of Sheffield and saying, who we are, never heard of them and what we do, and we're signing up as members. And to be honest, I never had a cause to make any reports, but it would have been interesting at the time to see how many people did follow up on that. I'm sure there would have been some.
One thing I would say is we are seeing an increase in reports from the light rail sector.
I've been busy. But, no, sorry.
So
we know it's you now.
that shows to me there's evidence that the message is getting out there, and people are and networks are working with us to help ensure that their staff know we're there, and it is working, because we've now been able to gather that insight and give it back to the members, so we're listening on their behalf.
Yeah, and you've been actively invited to those member groups, LROCs, LREGs.
Yeah.
They obviously see the benefit of it as organisations, which is testament to them and giving their time to it as well. So.
Yeah.
Well, brilliant. Thank you both. Thank you, Susan,
Thank
for travelling
you.
down. Hope you've enjoyed Birmingham.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, good.
Hope you enjoyed being back on the sofa again.
You
Actually,
know
no, it was
me,
on the tram last time, wasn't it? But
any
back on
excuse
another
to talk
episode.
again, but Sue did most of it, so that's good. It's been enjoyable, and I'm glad we've got that message out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, fantastic.
Thank you, Carly, for inviting us.
Oh, no, of course. No, I think there'll be another addition to the podcast. So
Excellent.
Thank you everyone for watching or listening. Don't forget to check out the other episodes, and remember to like, follow and share across all our platforms, and we'll see you in our next episode. Take care. Bye.
Bye.